When specifying an index for any of the sequences we've considered so far, we've always used for that index an expression that yielded a non-negative integer, so 0 or some positive value. But it turns out that we can specify negative indices. So let's discuss those now. And negative indices start from the back of the sequence. In other words, the last element has an index of -1, the next to the last element has an index of -2, and so on. And you'll see that when specifying elements towards the end of a sequence, these negative indices are quite handy. And let's spell things out in a bit more detail. Let's assume that we have an identifier S that is assigned the string hello. And now let's give some ASCII art to illustrate how we could use positive or negative indices. We'll start by drawing a box around each of the elements or characters of this string. So I'll write a plus sign followed by 3 hyphens or dashes. I'll select that text, cut it and paste it 6 times. Then I'll add a trailing plus sign. Then let's say that the string S is equal to the letter H, the letter E, I'll move the cursor out of the way, the letter L again, the letter O, and finally we have the exclamation point. And then I'll recall what was the top of this box. It works for the bottom too. And now let's give the positive indices for each element of this string. So we know the first character, first element, is offset 0 from the beginning, so it has an index of 0. The E has an index of 1 since it's offset 1 from the beginning. The L has an index of 2, the next L 3, then O has an index of 4, and finally the last character of this 6-element string has an index of 5. But when it comes to negative indices, the first element has an index of -6, the negative of the length of the string, and then -5, then -4, then -3, then -2, and finally the last element of the sequence, this string, has an index, a negative index of -1. In general, we can write that the index of the last element, if we're using positive indices, that would be the length of the sequence -1. Or, more conveniently, if we're using negative indices, it's just an index of -1. And then if we want the index of the first element and we want to use positive indices, then it's convenient just to write 0. Or if we're using negative indices, that would be minus the length of the sequence. Now let's demonstrate that this works. If we have S with an index of -1, we get the exclamation point, S with an index of -2, and we get O. Now let's have a for loop. For I in the range going from a value of 1 to the length of S plus 1. Let's do this. Let's print the negative of I and S with an index of -I. And hitting return twice, we see the negative indices running from -1 to -6 with the corresponding character or element of this sequence. Now let's use another for loop. Let's say for I in the range starting from a value of -1 going to the negative of the length of S -1 with an increment of -1. And this time what we'll do is we'll print S with an index of I, but we'll set the optional end parameter to the empty string. So we won't get a new line character after each iteration of the loop or after each character of S. And hitting return twice this time, we see the string written backwards. So keep in mind that negative indices pertain to more than just strings. They work for any sequence, whether that's a list, a tuple, or a string, and they make life convenient when dealing with things towards the end of the list. And we'll see even a bit more of that in the next video, where we'll talk about slices.